wife and daughter, he can be found on high mountain streams, untangling his fly line from low-hanging trees. I want to warn you, you might have noticed a little bit, I'm dyslexic. And so when I read, I sometimes have trouble. And so I'm going to read a bit of one of the chapters that I enjoyed so much. And forgive me for stumbling a little bit. It's one of my things. So anyway, this is A Matter of Degrees. In Fairbanks, Alaska, on January 30th, 1989, the air temperature never got above 56 below zero. The night before, a Canadian military C-130 had crashed while trying to land at Wainwright Army Base, killing the crew of 8. The tragedy was blamed on the effects of the record-breaking cold on the Hercules aircraft engines. Word at the airport was that the fuel had gelled and the turbines died on final approach. My 737 ride into Fairbanks, the last flight to get in for the next 8 days. Ice fog so thickly shrouded the town along the Chinook River, a major tributary of the Yukon, that I couldn't tell when walking across an intersection if there were vehicles coming or not. Multiple car pileups were common. Vehicles were abandoned where they'd broken down, and the Fairbanks Hospital and clinics were treating dozens of ill-clad motorists for frostbitten extremities after they had tried to walk for help. Fan belts shattered by the cold kept, fans belts shattered by the cold kept appearing at my feet. The sun-bleached sign for the Chicago Inn bragged, electric heat, which was an attribute I'd appreciated as I walked the mile across town. The motel owner had warned me not to try. 2 layers of fleece long johns, 40 below boots, boiled wool pants, a green down Michelin man coat, and a beaver skin hat were adequate for strolling atop the crunchy snowpack. Earlier that day, the Alaska State Department of Transportation had officially closed the 516-mile all-weather road from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay, to the Prudhoe Bay oil fields. For the first time in its 10-year history, the remote road through the Alaska interior was deemed unsafe due to extreme cold. I'd come to Fairbanks to take a ride north on the Pipeline Haul Road and was at best ambivalent about heading even further into the Arctic and colder temperatures. I reached the trailer house office of the Sourdough Express to meet Whitey Gregory, a garrulous driver/owner, figuring he'd be telling me my ride up north would be postponed. The vast fence Sourdough Express truck yard was notable for its dozens of streetlights. Their pink sodium vapor glow barely prevailed over the ice fog. The yard was replete with a dozen quiet semi-tractors that were clean of snow, an array of variously configured trailers, most being tankers. I walked into the cavernous shop with Whitey, who told me that if he was open, one of the 14-foot high doors, if he would open one of the 14-foot high doors enough heat would escape that fluids in the shop would freeze before the furnace could raise the temperatures back up to normal. Normally, Whitey, verbose and warm, hearted, declared, "It's too cold to snow." He cut a chuckle short and added, "Get it?" So I'll end with that. My reading hurts my ears, so I apologize. It's so beautiful, and Tom deserves better than a dyslexic person stumbling over his gorgeous language. But I hope you all were able to get a taste of the fact that this is a beautiful book.
So atmospheric.
Yes,
Yeah,
very
love
much
it.
so. Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So next, myself and Loren
Tom are going to get on here for a little bit, but first I'd also want to thank Betsy. Thank you so much for taking an early review of this proof before, we went to publication. I mean, it's no easy thing to read a book from cover to cover and try to summarize it with a couple of catchy sentences. So really, really appreciate you doing that. And I want to start by reading what she wrote here. Made it to the back of the cover of the book. It says, with wistfulness and wit, Harpole shares tales of Alaska, the former Soviet Union, small town Montana, and beyond. In the self-effacing tradition of Tim Cahill's work, his adventures, sometimes unanticipated, are always told with a rough and ready heart. And that's exactly what I think about it too. There's a little bit of everything in this book. It's got adventure from that story that Betsy just read about traveling above the Arctic, to free falling with a peregrine falcon, protesting in Russia during the Gorbachev years. There's near-death experiences, there's survival, love, loss, and all wrapped up in Harpole's own unique sense of humor. So, after I read the first manuscript, I was really interested. And then I met Harp in person, and that sort of sealed the deal. This book has probably one of the more interesting origin stories of any book that I know. But I wanted to bring Loren in to kind of talk about that a little bit more. He kind of discovered this thing. Without him, it wouldn't have become a book. So, I don't know, Loren, if you want to pop in or. So I got an email one day from.
Loren's muted.
Looks like he's still on mute.
Here I am. Okay,
Oh, there we go.
I'm unmuted, which is probably not a good idea. But anyway, well, the whole deal, and Betsy, by the way, thank you so much for you hooking on to the wonderful thing that Tom did. And that was a big boost for the book, and thank you. But, the whole thing started as such a serendipitous little thing. A Facebook picture posted of a guy throwing his coffee into the frozen air. And I don't even know how Tom saw the thing because he's not a friend on Facebook. And this was just about 1 year ago. And I got a message from a Tom Harpole that I did that once, throwing my coffee into the frozen air. And so anyway, we corresponded, and he said, I'll send you an article about that thing I did. And that turned out to be the story of A Matter of Degrees. And God Almighty, I loved it. And we continued to correspond. And he kept feeding me pieces that he'd done, and all of which had been published in various magazines. And so I'm loving this stuff, and I ended up forwarding it, sending it to friends, and they liked it as much as I did. And then I'm thinking, gosh, well, why should this stuff be languishing somewhere in some archive somewhere? People would love to read this crazy stuff. And so Tom and I corresponded, and I said, Tom, what do you think about trying to, get this into an anthology or something? And I was so surprised to see he was reluctant. As I said in my introduction, I think Tom had lost the idea that his writing of 20 and 30 years ago was no longer relevant. And God, I couldn't disagree more, because it was timeless stuff. He was writing about personal adventures, things that very few people would even attempt to do. And so anyway, we talked on, and finally I met Tom in person in Missoula, and we talked, and again, my enthusiasm factor may have done something. And he said, gosh, okay, let's try. And then we did some networking, and Andrea Peacock of Elk River Books suggested, gave me the email address for Daniel Rice. And I sent an email, and he said, yeah, I'd be willing to look at that. And why don't you send them to me? And I said, I would really like to present them in person. I have great faith in my enthusiasm. And so at a meeting in Livingston at the park, I gave them over to Daniel, and along with my enthusiasm, and lo and behold, he said he liked them. And gosh, we got together a couple of weeks later on the banks of the Yellowstone, and Tom and Daniel signed a contract, and I was there as the very happy midwife. And the universe spins out some really crazy fun things, and this was one of them for me. What a lovely thing to have been involved in this whole thing. Anyway, I'm delighted. I'm delighted that Tom is a wonderful human being, and I'm so glad this has happened.
Yes. Super cool how that kind of all came together. And thank you for reaching out to me, Loren. You know, since then that Harp's book has become a 2020 Montana Book Awards honor book. It reached #1 in sales in its category on Amazon. And plus it's just connected a lot of people. I mean, look at this cast we have here tonight. I think that speaks to the testament of Harp's character as a person, as well as, you know, what we got going on with this book. And maybe we can bring Harp in. Chelsea, is he around, or did he run off and hide?
Needs to talk to the machine so it'll look at him.
Yes. Welcome, Tom. Talk to the machine so it will look at you.
Welcome, machine.
Welcome.
Welcome, all you humans out there too. This is daunting tonight. I've labored in obscurity for so long, but to be surrounded by such luminaries is, and we've got Scott Hibbard and Abby Bigot here.
Not bigot. Pigget with a P.
Give me. Yeah.
That's great.
And we're swilling beers by the dozens.
We've got Irish Death on tap. Thanks to Tom.
Anyway, I can't thank everybody enough for this amazing honor that, you know, Loren helped put together. People dove in to do Scott Hibbard, Scott McMillion, Betsy, Fred Haefele, Dave Ames, a bunch of people wrote blurbs for the book. And it's just amazing to me this happened. Dan is a damn fine editor, but he's also a real respectable publisher, and he's a good marketer. I didn't know he had even put this thing up for the Montana Book Award. But anyway, I'm sure thankful for all this that's going on. It feels to me like a kind of a legacy moment. I've got this book, and that means everything, really, at my age. So is Fred Haefele in on this? Is he here?
You know, there was
Fred is here.
There he is.
There's Fred.
I'm asking him to unmute him.
Unmute,
There he
Fred.
is.
There
At
he is.
last.
All right.
Just joking, you guys.
So
Yeah,
Fred and I worked together doing tree work for, I don't know, 2-3 years. And I keep thinking about it. So he's a Wallace Stegner fellow, and he'd be 30, 40 feet up a tree trying to look in people's upstairs windows. And if anybody walked out,
can't blame me for that, Tom.
I would holler up.
way to gather material.
I need a neologism for that encompasses, let's say, a sense of nostalgia for something that's no longer produced, whatever. And he'd be up in the tree trying to just concentrate on what he's doing. And he'd always usually holler the same answer back down. I'm not sure what that was, but we'd only do it if the tree owner showed up and was wondering who was in their backyard looking in their window. So anyway, delighted that you're here this evening. I'm going to read a piece a little later you're going to hate, but I'm just so pleased to see you again, bro. And everybody else here too, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
From
You
Instagram,
know,
and Eric Heidel says hello.
Ah,
Hey,
nice.
Harp.
All right.
yeah, I suppose maybe we ought to throw it out there that if anybody has any questions, they can just drop that in the comments on your Instagram post, right, Chels?
Absolutely. Or you can put it into the chat box on Zoom, and I'm keeping an eye on it, and we can ask them at the appropriate time, or you can send them direct to me if you know how to work. There's many of functions that I will be keeping an eye on as we go through this.
Cool. Hey, Harp, I know one of the things that a few people have brought to my attention of that they found interesting was how you had this writing career, but you already had a full logging career prior to that. I mean, you know, is that?
Well, I had a good 20 years of mostly horse logging and then contract timber falling up southeast Alaska and
Mhm.
Montana, Olympic Peninsula for a while. So it wasn't all wall tents, and there were some pretty scuzzy motels involved and all that too.
Eric Heidel wants to know how your golf game these days. How's your golf game these days, Harp?
It's non-existent. I think I could still putt, but that'd be about it. In fact, Loren Haarr wants to take me out on a putting green one of these days, and I'll show him what an old pool player can do.
I tremble, Tom, I tremble.
Well, Scott Hibbard's sitting here, and I played a fair few games of golf with Scott. And I'd like to see Loren Haarr and Scott Hibbard play golf again one of these days.
Mhm.
May it happen. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, works for me. Any?
You know, Tom, brother Tom, this whole thing was just a thing spun out as a gift from the universe. I swear to God, it was. It just
Boy, it's yeah.
too many serendipitous things went on with this. Gosh, how fun for me.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. Everything just seemed to keep working and fitting together, and nobody pushed anything. It just happened. That was
It just happened. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So rare in the publishing industry.
Oh yeah. I kind of tried to get this anthology out there a couple times. You know, approached a few publishers, and the standard line was, well, nobody's doing anthologies, and I thought, well, okay, fair enough. They know what they're talking about. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Sure glad they didn't.
That's right.
Mhm.
Could I jump in real quick with a comment?
Yes.
This is Scott McMillion. I run the Montana Quarterly magazine, and Tom sent me a stack of stories, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and I thought, wow, who is this guy? How come I've never heard of him? And I love the stories, and we picked one that I ran. It only cost me a couple hundred subscribers. It was one about feeding reefers to a black bear in a truck in a trap, but it was worth it. I think the subscribers who stuck with us, it was a mark of their appreciation. But when I got the manuscript, I thought I'd read all these stories, and then I found all these other ones that he hadn't sent me. And I just want to say, Tom, that's the best book I've read in a long time. And
Wow.
people talk about collections and the pros and cons of it. But Daniel, I salute you for doing it. But Tom, you've hit one out of the park on this, and I tip my hat. I expose my bald pate to dangerous solar rays on your behalf, and thank you for doing this. I hate to butt in, but I gotta go. My wives are in the kitchen. They're starting to bicker and I gotta go turn the hose on them. So,
Oh my God.
Fun with that.
Get him, Scott, get him.
You got a thawed out hose already, Scott?
Tom, what's that?
You got a thawed out hose handy.
Well, anyway, I gotta put this out before it turns into a badger fight and
Hey, Scott.
go eat dinner. But thanks so much, and thank you to Montana Book Company for making this happen.
Hey, Scott. Scott, this is Duella.
Hi, Duella.
Thanks.
How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for the review in the Montana Quarterly this month. As soon as I read the review, I ordered the book. So thank
Well,
you.
good. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. I just finished my copy last night. I've had it for a couple of months, but I took the advice that somebody said of read one chapter a day, and I think that's the way to go through this book.
Good advice. Hey, I'll see you for lunch in May.
Okay, I hope so. And really, Tom, this is a home run. You deserve everything that happens to you. And Daniel, you too.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Scott.
guys.
Oh, it's so much fun to work on. Hey, it just occurred to me that a few people have asked about the book cover and said, is that Tom on the cover? And it actually is. Those were a couple of is it Percheron horses, Harp?
Yeah, Percher and Cross. The one was a registered stud, and then that's his son. So Ike and Ebb. And that was one of the last teams I sold before we moved to Ireland. I had 3 teams up at the place near Avon and a couple of Morgan Mayers I just kept breeding back. So they were pretty thrifty sized horses and good hard feet. So yeah, I just love those Percherons.
Were they were working horses?
Logging horses, although the logging, they tend to thrust into the harness too hard to overcome inertia when you're logging with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get them calmed down from that for, pulling a dump rake or a sleigh or a wagon or anything. So I would just get them harness broke and then leave it up to whoever I was selling them to train them more specifically.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, are there many loggers who have an orangutan on their crew?
Baboon.
Why was I thinking Wade was an orangutan? Baboon.
The story about that baboon was interesting. They have to be a 5th generation domesticated baboon in order to legally have them. And then somebody somewhere along the line knocked him out and took his incisors out of him. So he was pretty easy to put up with, but I've heard that term, get in the ass. Get in the ass. Well, a baboon's butt turns bright red when they're when their hormone imbalances are kicking in. Weightlifters ice around it and cinch it up in the back and chain him to a tree when that happens. He out of everybody.
Oh my God, Tom.
He'd ride in the back of the 4-door pickup. We called them crummies in those days, but he'd ride in the back of the crummy and we'd listen to Paul Harvey at lunchtime. And he found out he'd get some extra treats if he reached up and turned Paul Harvey off.
That's amazing.
Yeah. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, I realize that might not make sense why I brought that up to anybody who hasn't read the book yet. But in his story, The Last of Butch, there's a baboon working with him on the logging side, and I had to reread that section a couple times. So I was like, man, that just sounds so cool to be out in the middle of, was it Washington forest with a baboon?
Yeah, Oregon Coast Range.
Oregon coast, yeah.
Yeah, just west of Philomath.
Were you wanting to read anything tonight, Harp, or should we just keep on rolling? Or
I was asked to read for 15 minutes. So at some point, let's circumcise our watches and I'll start reading.
Love to make you the center of attention here.
Well, we got plenty of time. I think we got an hour and a
We
half.
do.
Yeah. Should we
So-
save that for a little bit and maybe bring in Fred or?
Russell Rowland's always got something to say too, so let's
Sure.
give everybody a shot.
It's true. Maybe
Where's Russell?
Russell's here. Russell, if you want to take yourself off mute.
Yeah. First of all, I want to know why nobody's wearing masks.
Uh-oh.
Just kidding.
Trouble.
So yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Chelsea, thanks a lot for putting this together. You always do great events. And in fact, I met Tom at one of your events when I did a reading there. And I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago we met. And Tom,
That was a great.
we started communicating and he sent me some stories and I pretty much had the same reaction everyone else has mentioned. I was blown away and wondered why I hadn't heard of him. And unlike Loren, I didn't find somebody to get him published, but I'm thrilled that somebody did. You know, I think it's like everyone has said, you're one of the things I love about your stories. You have such a fabulous combination of the working class language and intellectual approach to an intellectual philosophical approach to the whole thing. I don't think I've known anybody who's almost died as many times as you have. And I love how many of these stories are, the focus is on you just trying to figure out a way to either save yourself, like the cutting your arm off, or the guy in the dumpster. That was one of my favorites. Getting that guy out of the dumpster. So, you know, I want to congratulate you, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you these last few years. And I'm going to read the shortest one in here, which is another near-death experience called Choking Near to Death, the Otto Heimlich. And it gives a really good sense of Tom's humor and also his ingenuity as far as saving himself. I went to swallow some vitamins a couple days ago that I'd thrown into a sandwich bag with some chocolate-covered espresso beans. I'd left the little package in my pickup and the capsules and candy had melted together. I broke off a chunk that seemed to have about the right number of pills and chocolate-coated beans, and as always had a pint glass of water to wash everything down. I should have chewed it a little, but I regard as kind of cool my ability to throw a dozen vitamins in my maw and flush them down easily. But what I popped into my mouth was a wad, not a handful, of unconsolidated pills. The coalesced mass of pills and candy, roughly the size of a golf ball, went down the wrong pipe, and my first startled inhalation probably lodged it more firmly in my trachea, the tube that carries air to your lungs. That was the last breath I drew for a while, and could have been the last one ever. For reasons unknown to me still, except that I was panicked, I kind of loped around the central chimney of my house, covering perhaps 4 laps while trying to retch. Finally, convinced that I'd fall over dead pretty soon, because I hadn't taken a breath during these excursions, I quit running around. Back in my kitchen, my dog Max, who'd never seen such shenanigans, had been trotting alongside me, barking. I tried to shush him and realized that I couldn't manage a whisper. I ended up at the sink, certain that I had just a few seconds left before I passed out and died. I balled up my fist and laid it on the edge of the kitchen counter with my thumb on top, and balled up my other fist and set it in the notch below the breastbone where the excuse me, where the ribs fall away from each other, and I dropped onto it. Dropping didn't work. I needed to make the air left in my lungs compress explosively and dislodge the wad. I plunged desperately onto both fists, stacked up on the counter, and the clod of chocolate and vitamin capsules popped out of me, hit the windows, and thunked on the sink bottom, impressing me with its solidarity. It was slimy brown. The chocolate coating looked shiny from melting slightly while it resided in my windpipe. My throat was so sore I wasn't sure for a while if I'd gotten it all out. I knew with utter certainty that I had been just seconds away from death. Survivor's euphoria hadn't kicked in yet, and I felt about as alarmed as the time I had a malfunction on my main parachute. I was falling 1,000 feet every 6 seconds and had to cut away the main chute and pull my reserve. When I was about 800 feet above the ground, I saved my own ass with 2 seconds to spare. I won't read the whole thing, but that just gives you a great sense of the humor in this book and the ingenuity. There's so many stories like that. The one in the tree where he cuts his arm off just about, yeah, it scared the hell out of me. I just don't have the sense of adventure and like daring do that Tom does. And I was actually wanted to ask him about where that comes from. It seems like you've kind of lived your life that way, doing things that a lot of people wouldn't even think of doing.
I kind of lead myself astray incrementally. And yeah, you don't get into those things. I mean, I blew a finger off playing Scrabble. Nobody starts playing Scrabble thinking there's a problem. So it's, you know, you just get involved in that stuff kind of incrementally. And next thing you know, you got to fish or cut bait. So. I don't know. I guess that's what it's all about.
I just wanted to say it is so Tom Harpole on that stub of a finger that was blown off with firecrackers. He's had a smiley face tattooed on the end of it, which is
Keep it raised. There we go.
wonderful.
I call him Al.
Hi, Al. Thanks for joining us. Oh my God. We're so glad that you survived all of these incremental near-death experiences to be here today to share those with us.
Yeah. How about, could we hear something from Fred Haefele? Because I just haven't heard enough from Fred in too long.
We're expecting something from you, Fred.
Good God. Well, I've known Tom for a while, and we were good friends, and we worked together very closely for 2-3 years. That sounds about right. And we did a lot of windshield time in pickup trucks, driving around from job to job. And I heard most of these stories, and that's where I heard them, driving around with Tom. And I had some stories of my own, and he had his stories, and we had a great time. And the work we did was pretty adventurous much of the time, and kept us on our toes. And gosh, I don't know, we got to be good friends. And I always admired his writing, and I had seen some of these stories along the way, those that I hadn't heard in the pickup. And I thought, this guy's not half bad. And I'm so glad that you found the right people in the right place and the right time, Tom, to put these stories together. And it's a hell of a good book. And it was a pleasure to read it. And I'm honored to have heard many of these stories before they were even published. I still don't believe them, but nevertheless, if you say they're true, they must be true, Tom.
What a sweet talker, Fred.
Congratulations, Tom. Nice work.
Thank you. That means a lot, bro. So I'm going to eventually read a piece that you're going to hate, Fred. It's the one about when
I can hardly wait.
What's that?
I can hardly wait.
Yeah, it's I abrogated a lot of the basic tenets of safety that were supposed to be thinking about when we're out, climbing trees. So,
I've been meaning to discuss that with you, Tom.
yeah. Well, my arm I cut off was not above my head. It was only about chest height. So I wasn't taking too many chances that day. It was just one of those things. How are we doing for time, Chelsea?
We're great. It's
Okay.
7:15. Let's see. So we've had Dan and Fred. And I mean, would you like to read us something?
Yeah, sure.
We'd love to hear you read your work. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I've read this a couple times today just to get ready. And what this is all about is I was asked to come and tip a few beetle-killed ponderosas on the campus of my old alma mater in Helena here at Carroll College. And just the irony of, about the best thing I could do for them after 25 years of writing for national glossies was come and tip the damn trees over for them. So anyway, I was working that day. I've been helping my son-in-law, Andy Herbert, get into arborist and tree climbing and tree tipping and all that stuff, as well as my son, who's probably been running chainsaw since he was about 15, 14. So anyway, I was working with my son-in-law, Andy Herbert, and I'll just start this. It's about 7 pages into this kind of long essay. I was up that big pine on my alma mater because I had to remove 2 thick limbs that could have damaged the landscaping where I intended to lay the old hooter down. Mostly what I was thinking about was persuading this tall, limby pine on the ground in the direction where it wasn't leaning. Concurrent with that need was the fact that if I didn't tip it over strategically, it would still require 2 semi-loads to haul away the trunk and massive limbs, which Andy and I would have to drag an extra 100 feet or so. I'd often disregarded basic safety rules when I worked alone and never answered to anyone until Andy began working with me. The pine was about 36 inches in diameter, too big to climb with my tree spurs and flip line, so I climbed my sketchy old 28-foot extension ladder without harnessing up. We set the tall ladder up on the south side of the tree because the bull pine was leaning to the north. I was hustling up into this tree's midsection because a propitious wind had been gusting out of the northwest that would help me tip the tree in the southeast where I intended to make it fall. As soon as I get back on the ground, I could make the chainsaw cuts and pound wedges into these saw curves that would cause it to fall where I wanted it to, avoiding damaging the landscaping around its belled out base. I needed to quickly saw 2 limbs off before the helpful morning winds died down or shifted. 1 limb was intact, about 13 feet long, 4 inches in diameter, where it grew from the bole of the tree. Above it, partially separated from the bole, hanging vertically and swinging in the gust, was the 2nd limb I had to remove. And then there was a 3rd limb, my left arm, that my chainsaw found that last time I climbed a tree. Sometimes loggers and arborists rush the work and get mangled simply because they're under pressure to save time, taking shortcuts that are ill-advised. Here I intended to avoid damaging the meticulously groomed campus landscaping, and if I did this right, it'd save several hours of drudgery dragging about 5 tons of limbs and trunk to our dumpster truck's access area. I started my chainsaw up there and grabbed the intact limb at about my rib cage level with my left hand, so I could huck it out beyond the drip edge of the tree. I revved my top saw, a specially designed tree climber saw that may be deployed one-handed while the arborist is climbing around in treetops. I intended to sever the horizontal limb when a sudden gust slammed the upper vertically swinging limb into my right arm, which held the full throttle saw. That swinging limb slapped my right elbow hard enough that for a split second, I had no control of the saw and it buried itself in my left forearm, a couple inches below my elbow. I thought, everything has just changed. In less than a second, I lost the use of my arm, which was barely attached and laying atop the limb I'd meant to saw off. They resembled each other proportionally, but my limb was awash in pulsing, welling, vivid red blood. My arm more closely resembled the swinging tree limb that had just driven the chainsaw through it. It was hanging on by some stubborn strands of connective tissue, muscle, and the remains of the ulnar bone. With just the tops of the cutters visible, the 3-inch wide bar and chain were buried in my arm in a kerf that angled towards my elbow. I lifted the saw out of my arm and 2 severed arteries pumped blood into the air above me and the tree trunk and ladder below me, cascading onto Andy. He got showered, but kept steady in the ladder. I heard him call 911 and he told me he was removing his belt for a tourniquet. A fully wound up top saw moves the chain around the bar at 88 feet per second or 55 miles an hour. Meat and bone do not impede a steel top saw one bit. My memory of the ensuing events and vignettes are a little fuzzy, so bear with me here. I felt hopeful for a couple breaths. A quick sort of fantasy briefly bemused me that this wasn't that serious, that I just get patched up somehow. But the blood spraying and spurting all around disabused me of my denial mechanisms. The blood coated nearby surfaces and fell away from me to the manicured lawn where Andy, our work truck, and our arborist equipment were strewn around the hillside landscape down there. This incomprehensible dilemma occurred to me piecemeal over a couple more breaths that bought me time to understand that this was real and I had very little time to react. During my 10 years as volunteer EMT, I attended 32 hours per year of continuing education, and somewhere along the way I learned that humans can exsanguinate in less than 2 minutes with 2 arteries pumping your plasma. My blood was arcing from my arm about 8 feet, which was the most dramatic thing I've seen my body do since the trampoline days. I thought I could reach into my pulpy forearm, avoiding the raw cut bone ends, and I could squash down or pinch off the arteries. I didn't entertain any notion I'd just wait up there for help. I had to get back down on the ground as quickly as I could. Andy, of course, had seen the bloody topsaw drop, and despite the showering he was enduring, he quietly encouraged me to get myself down. Uncertainty about the present and the future of my left arm was a kind of terrible subtext. My muscle memory from thousands of tree descents seemed to count for nothing. I was moving awkwardly. I had blood on my glasses and I was unsure where my feet were going. Limiting blood loss and descending one-armed right now were the only goals I had in mind. I paused in my descent a few times and groped into the gaping maw and pinched and squashed off the blood flow, and I meant to compose myself. Then I'd grab the tacky ladder as the scarlet squirts resumed. Pause, probe, squash, pinch, descend 3-4 rungs, repeat. I thought it went okay, but my vision was fading as I grew lightheaded. Numerous folks have asked if it hurt. Humans can't exactly recall pain. We know that a sensory overload was the central theme of our existence for a while, but we cannot recall how any given injury actually felt. That's why women may have more than one baby. That's why fools like me must resort to euphemism and denial about the very real pain that I've so often visited upon myself. Human bodies are always evolving, and there's never been a reward for acknowledging pain. We evolved understanding that announcing or in any way vocalizing about injuries just brought the predators on. I had my right shoulder, elbow, and wrist busted and crushed by a fallen tree that kept me down overnight in the early 80s. The after effects chased me around decades later. After way too many Montana Band-Aids bought by workers' comp, they allowed me to head to Johns Hopkins Hospital, a vaunted but shabby collection of buildings in a murderous Baltimore neighborhood where I underwent 9 surgeries in 2 years. To allay pain, they prescribed more than 3,500 OxyContins in about 3 years. The opioids help, but they're sickening and cause constipation and depression and exacerbate the complete self-absorption where chronic pain was incrementally taking me. I crawled under the self-centered rock of depression until my kids admitted that the medicated version of the old man was scaring them. It wasn't much of a leap for a pantheist to go veterinary. My first real job was cleaning up dog shit and observing dogs at a veterinary hospital in Denver in 1963. I now aspire to emulate the pain response dogs elicit. They have it dialed in. Dogs don't appear to acknowledge chronic problems. They compensate. Play, sexual curiosity, and food distract them as the healing proceeds. This course is worth cultivating. Buy time. By and by, the pain will cut you some slack. Up in that tree, I felt no pain. I understood the fact that I could die this day, but the task at hand kept my thoughts focused. I wasn't thinking much past getting myself down and Andy applying a tourniquet. I sensed my brain function declining, but at 66, that's a familiar misgiving. Numerous folks have offered the opinion I was too old to still be climbing trees. I'd heard such admonitions for a few years. I considered and dismissed them as merely self-referencing. For 20 years, my chosen vocation, climbing and tipping tricky trees, paid well enough to buy me time for reading and writing. And then for about 22 years, magazine writing paid the bills, even as accumulated logging injuries had their way with me. My final act of denial may well be feigning indignity for living long enough to experience the decrepitude that I've inflicted on my body for as long as I can remember. But I asked for it. A gal I dated for a couple years, who was the smartest of all and generally used her smarts for funny, believes that there are no accidents, that humans somehow call down misfortune upon themselves. I couldn't argue with her given my crash dummy track record, but I couldn't reconcile her beliefs with, say, an infant being assaulted. A grizzly jumped her one morning while she was walking her dog along the upper Yellowstone River, and by that evening, she regarded the attack as the most spiritual experience of her life. I hope she sticks with her story. Consistent spirituality adds up. Pushing a chainsaw running full bore through my left arm was not at all spiritual at first blush. It was a totally losing deal with no concurrent epiphanies or apparent silver linings. I regarded the gory mess where the chainsaw bar had been buried in my arm and the cartoonishly squirting arteries, and I realized that blood is terrifically fascinating in ways you don't usually see. It blanketed the ponderosa bark. It flowed lavishly but languidly, coagulating like cooling lava down the sun-bleached pinkish extension ladder. I was peripherally aware that I might not be alive in a couple of minutes, but thoughts of diminished longevity in no way chased me down that ladder. Besides, I figured that longevity is a matter of plain dumb luck. My cousin Gus, a reluctantly retired doctor, reasoned with me when my prostate blood test spiked and the urologist wanted to do a biopsy. Googling had turned up the phrase death sentence. I called Gus and he said, "Get off fucking Google." There's always been one for euphony. Prostate cancer's slow. Don't let them do the biopsy. Forget about the PSA numbers game. There's false positives, he said. Then briefly abandoning his bedside manner, he added, "Well, you've been going, my money's on something else getting you first anyway." I trust Gus. He does not traffic in platitudes. Before something else gets me, I want to write about sawing through my arm. I did my research. On the unassailable internet, I Googled auto amputation and perused cases of people who have cut off their own limbs or hired it done. Many on the progression of websites that appeared did so because they were sexually aroused by the idea of being an amputee, a potemnophilia. There are also those who have cut off their own limbs because they believe the limb doesn't belong to them. That is body integrity identity disorder, also known as amputee identity disorder or xenomelia. I don't dismiss those mindsets, but the sordid depths one might explore when the body endures such a transformation are beyond my ken. Some internet auto amputation stories are of those who have self-amputated to survive, as did Aaron Ralston, the plucky canyoneer who, after 127 hours with his arm pinned by a rock, finally committed to cutting it off with a pocket knife. Human behavior is endlessly interesting, especially so when we face an uncertain but permanent change we've not chosen. Sometimes, however, some guys, always guys, seem to volunteer for such changes. I'm entertained by guys, always guys, who say, I'd cut my left arm off for, or I'd give a leg for, I'd give my left nut for. The object of this morbid sacrifice is usually a vehicle. To be sure, it should be equipped with an automatic transmission. Or an otherwise unattainable sexual experience in which safety may not even be an afterthought. Honestly, have you ever heard a woman wish to self-mutilate in exchange for quickie sex or a cool car? My first detached reflection as a fresh amputee on terra firma was that I was bereft and my life had changed ineluctably right there up a bullpine on my old campus. I majored in English, where they tacitly discouraged single syllable usage. Okay, in that moment, I didn't think bereft or ineluctably, but I intuited that my life had just changed beyond imagining. In a language lover's effort to eschew cliche, I dismissed self-pity, which could preempt redemption, reducing this event to the quotidian. I avoided uttering dirty words, even gateway curses like son of a gun. Cussing these days has become crass, pedestrian, diminished through heedless repetition in both drama and evocation. My heart was wantonly pumping my blood all over the place while my vision narrowed as if I were squinting through gauze. With Andy's help, I slumped upon a low stone retaining wall, one of the features I had not wanted to damage, with the weight of the old pine crashing down. And that's a 15-minute reading.
Lovely,
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
lovely. Everyone is on mute, so you feel free to unmute yourselves now. And if you'd like to give him another
Oh, that
weird
was great.
little applause, I'd love to hear it from you.
I bet your friend's got something to say.
Tom, I just wanted to say that it didn't occur to me until now, just now, but this book reminds me of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's got the same sort of brilliant description of what's happening, but also the exploration of how it fits into the overall picture, the big picture. And I just wanted to throw that out. I think it's a high compliment. So thank you for reading that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
High compliment. You know, I enjoyed that story immensely the first few times I read it, and I think I like it even more now that I've heard you read it.
Yeah,
Cool.
I agree. There was multiple times when I looked over at the panel of people who are actually listening to this, and the expressions of, like, you know, Betsy had her hand on her forehead at one point, like she didn't want to see necessarily. And I was holding my chest, and Abby was doing this. And, but the way you use language to frame this horrific situation is, I don't want to say ornamental in a way that is tacky.
I have two men in my bedroom. It's nice.
Oh, Kathleen has joined us. Hi, Kathleen. Hi. I'm muting you. Sorry. But beautifully articulated with the words that you used for such a horrific experience. And I just want to, as a community member who remembers when that happens to you, not even being close to you then, was horrified at the potential loss of you as a community member. So I'm so glad that you're here today to tell us about it. And it's a damn miracle.
And he still has his arm.
And he still has his damn arm.
Yeah. It's
And
my go-to arm. Now, the day that happened, my son went out and bought me a pink hard hat and a clipboard, and I haven't even started chainsaw in probably 4 years.
God. We've got some applause coming from Instagram too, by the way.
Oh, nice.
So do we have any questions for Tom? I mean, the man has had quite a life. I want to open it up, and we have, if you don't just take yourself off of mute, we have a chat box. So please feel free to enter anything in there. Tom can see it. We can see it on this end. We're happy to answer some questions and love to hear what y'all, I know most of you are friends with Tom, so let him have it.
You have to unmute yourselves first. Though.
Yes, you'll have to unmute yourself first. And thanks for tolerating this very weird and archaic system I have going on here. I appreciate it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As I said to start, there's so much joy in even in recounting very difficult situations. There's a joy that comes. I feel like by reading it, Tom loves writing, and I just wanted to hear about how he feels about writing, because as somebody, I've written, but I don't feel joy in writing. It's really hard for me to write, and I like it when I've done it and look back at it and say, oh, okay, so this makes sense. But I'm just curious about the writing process, because I feel like there's a huge amount of love that I feel when I'm reading it that you put into your writing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thanks, Betsy. My mom, before the phrase was even invented, was a single mom. She had 9 kids under 18 when the dad died. And the one thing she instilled in me, her second oldest, was love of language. Playing Scrabble, keeping 3 books going at a time. And I think a lot of time I'm writing for my mom. Just that write something that would please her. She was a pretty gutsy gal. She had all those kids and no money, and she just kept taking it on. You know, it was amazing to think about what all she faced. So the fact that she instilled love of language and reading and writing is, I'm sure, what led me to mislead myself.
That's lovely. Kathleen says, Loren is wrong. Sometimes you have to wait a couple of days after 2 paragraphs. And thank you for making the mother of an EMT totally grossed out today. Kathleen also appreciates knowing the Otto Heimlich maneuver at her age.
Yeah, that could come in handy, Kathleen.
Sure could. Oh, goodness. It's very touching. What is your favorite essay that you have out of the collection, or one of your articles that has been published that is included in this? I know that the near arm severing episode is one of the most recent, but do you have one of these that is like your darling, that, is really your first love of the collection?
The piece about skydiving, my first jump ever in Russia with Sergei Kiselov, Helena Solovyova, was probably the biggest jackpot of my life. The most powerfully affable people I've ever met. And I trusted them with my life, and subsequently probably did another 260 to 280 jumps in Russia with them and a bunch of other cosmonauts. But it was that essay was about overcoming the Russophobia that we grew up with in the 50s and 60s. And that's the one I think I liked the most of those.
Noted for all of you readers. Are you thinking about writing another book? Is there anything in the wheelhouse? Are you thinking fiction? I mean, I know you as a essay writer and a storyteller of nonfiction. But do you have anything else in the wheelhouse? Do you have any books that you're thinking about following up with this now that you've succeeded in this publication?
Yeah, I went up to real remote villages in Alaska for 22 years. Every winter I'd go up for 2 weeks, come home, maybe go up for another couple weeks, come home. And twice I took entire village schools, 28 kids, 32 kids, who were all cousins, and took them to Washington, D.C. And they wrote, my idea was to instill in them the confidence that they could write grants, because that's how those villages live. That's the only way they get anything done. So they wrote grants to Alaska Airlines, Delta Airlines, Smithsonian, and Costco to finance this whole trip. And we take the whole school from K through 12, and the school cook and 4 or 5 chaperones, although they're all cousins. But so I've got about 80,000 words on that. And that's just touching the surface.
Oh.
So I've got a whole bunch of that stuff that I'm going through right now and trying to make some kind of a book out of it.
So nonfiction again.
Yeah.
Yes. So, whoops. Sorry, Instagram. Whoopsie doodle. Sven wants to thank you for standing up to the right-wing bullies on Facebook, and that old white guys are taking fire these days for not taking on the wing nuts. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, it's been a hard time for the wing nuts since we lost Trump.
Darn it.
Yeah.
And Steve Albers is also watching today, just to let you know.
Cool.
Yeah. Bill wanted it set up here and just sharing this. It's been a delightful evening. I agree. Thank you to everyone. And that he agrees with the love comment Betsy just made. It was beautiful hearing your reading. He's taken off, but let's see. What other questions do we have for Tom? Please take yourself off mute, or if you want to harass him or tell us a story that you have about Tom. I'm down for those because I know you have them.
How could you not? He's a character.
Yeah, it's time to roast, y'all.
I'd like to talk about the time you tried to cut my arm off.
What?
No, I'm kidding.
Was it research for all the parts about robotic arm chopping?
That's right, yeah.
Erotic arm chopping. Well, I just feel like we've had a wonderful, collection of folks here today. Tom, we all adore you. We all are so happy you're with us and continue to be able to tell us stories. And,
Thanks.
Thank you for this beautiful book. And Dan, thank you for publishing Tom's beautiful book. I just River Feet Press is one of my favorite Montana presses. I like their aesthetic a lot. I feel like a lot of soul goes into the books that they bring forward for folks. So well done, Dan. Many of your books I really, really have enjoyed.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hart made it real easy for me, and I got to say thanks to you too. I mean, Montana Book Company, sharing local writers and just uplifting voices, and it's really cool the work you guys are doing over there.
Thank you so much. And hopefully I can get better at it. I'm not going to even claim to say that I'm good at events yet, but we're getting there. It's a steep learning curve in the indie bookseller industry. And, with that, I encourage you to go to one of your local indie booksellers across the state of Montana or elsewhere to special order it. I mean, we have an incredible community at Fact and Fiction and Country Bookshelf and Bison Books and House of Books and, Cassiopeia. It's just endless, wonderful booksellers everywhere doing their best. So we're honored to carry it. We have it here too. Call us if you want one. We're waiting on a restock. But otherwise, yeah.
Chelsea, where's Bison Books? I haven't heard of that.
Bison is in, I was gonna say Deer Lodge? Anaconda. Anaconda. So
Okay.
the people that used to own the newspaper there have picked up the bookstore, and now they own the bookstore, and it's Bison Books, and they have a beautiful neon sign out in front. So, and another new place to check out.
Yeah, and Reading Leaves.
Oh, and Reading Leaves in Townsend is a really great spot.
A little mini indie, and she's doing great things.
Yeah, she is doing really wonderful things for Townsend. So yes, make sure you get your stuff out there too. I did see here, there's a couple more questions. Yeah. Kathleen said, I love how you dedicated the book to your granddaughter, and I love to watch her reading it. And I'd love to watch her reading it. I have this very tender moment kind of stuck in my head from just before we all shut down last year, where Tom came in to buy some things for his granddaughter. His was still kind of mangled at that time. His hand wasn't working very well. And he bought some glitter glue for her, and it's still like stuck in my head as a Tom Harpole memory, buying this selection of glitter glue for his grandkiddo. Pam wants to know, would you rather do readings on Zoom in a library or in a grocery store?
Well, I had only aspired to the 7-Eleven until Pam got me into Albertsons. So I guess I'd have to go with the grocery store.
You know, one of the greatest stories I heard Margaret Atwood tell is that her first reading was done in a department store, and they stuck her by the men's underwear department, and it was a sloggy, wet day in Canada, and she'd hear these wet boots coming down the aisle, and she'd be ready to sign, and someone would say, do you know where the bathroom is? So a grocery store might be a step up. All right, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for dealing with the strange, you know.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for tolerating the many faceted Zoom/Instagram/everything. Tom, congratulations.
Thank you.
When we're able to come back together because we're vaccinated, we're gonna throw a damn good party for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
we'll make it happen.
Okay. Thanks,
There we are.
everybody. What a signal event in my old age here. Beautiful. Thanks.
Well done, Tom.
Congrats, my friend.
Thank you, Dan.
Right.
That was
Thanks,
fun.
Chelsea.
Yeah, it was.
You betcha.
Good to see everyone.
Good to see
Yeah.
you. Thank you again, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Chelsea.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks, Betsy.
Good night,
Lauren.
everybody.
Lauren, I'm ready to play some golf next time.
Yeah. Get Russell out there playing some golf.
Yeah.
Okay.